Hey, everybody. Welcome to what might be a short episode of the World's Okayest Mountain Bike Podcast, but we're really just covering one topic as far as I know today. And I have Kyle here with me because he helped me do this, but I have a new bike and I've gotten some good rides in on it. I think I can talk about it now from a knowledgeable point of view. And it was quite the ordeal putting it together. Uh, Kyle, I think we should talk about just what it's like to ride the bike and what it's good at, what it's bad at, et cetera, before we get into the build part, because I think people might be more interested in the actual bike review first, and then
Then
if
the
they want to stick
saga.
around and hear the drama, because there are some things that if you decide, man, those parts sound pretty good, I'd like to have them myself. There are some things we'll touch on as we go that you're gonna want to know going into it. But I
So for
got
Clint, what bike did you get, Clint?
there we go. I got a medium Giant Trance Advanced 29er. It's 120 rear travel, 130 front travel. Pretty middle of the road geometry, I would say.
So
Uh,
is it downcountry geometry or is it more just like semi-modern trail geometry at this point? Like what would
yeah, that's a good
I guess
question.
what's the difference between those two geometries? I don't know if there really is, I guess.
Um, I would say the geometry to me says uh, trail
Okay.
more than XC because it's not they didn't do the Epic Evo thing where they didn't just take a cross country frame, over fork it, call it a down country bike. Giant has a cross country bike. That's the Anthem. The Trance is like the short travel, fast trail bike. And then if you go up the line, there's the Trance X, which is 135 millimeter rear, 150 front, which is like your very true, one bike to kind of do a little bit of everything, middle of the
That's
road
the
trail bike.
that's the Midwest trail bike.
Yeah. And then they have the Rain, which is the enduro bike. And I guess the
Okay.
Glory, which is the downhill bike. But so the Trance that I have is not the Trance X. It is pretty much trail geometry with a very, very efficient rear end pedaling kinematic.
So is that
Uh,
the Maestro suspension?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So all three of the bigger bikes, the Trance, Trance X, and the Rain, are all on a Maestro layout, which I had never ridden, and people don't talk about Giant that much, but dadgum, like it works. Uh, I was a little nervous getting this bike. I had sold that YT Izzo, which I thought was pretty great. Had 130 mil rear travel, which I found myself at the bottom of quite a bit. Um, and I thought, man, what's it going to be like going with 10 millimeters less? And if you had blind tested me on these bikes, I would have told you this bike had 10 millimeters more. I still haven't found the bottom yet, but yeah. So let's get into it. So I have ridden it. I've ridden it at Steelville Bike Park, which is basically the equivalent of if you went and rode in like Bentonville somewhere. So you climb up to a central hub, you go down some flow trails with jumps and berms and what have you. And some of the jumps are pretty decent size, especially on their newer trails. Um, and then you climb back up, pick a different trail, do it all over again. So I've ridden it in that sort of situation. That's the first place I took it. And then I've also have done an entire Berryman Trail loop, which is 26.4 miles of rough single track. And I mean, it's not that the climbs are that steep, uh,
When
but
did you
there's
do that?
I did that Monday on Labor Day, Monday morning.
A full Berryman lap?
I did a full Berryman lap. Didn't realize how hot it was going to be. Fortunately, I took enough water. I ran out of water with about 3 miles to go, so I was okay. Didn't check the weather, and man, those last 5 miles or so, it got hot. And I was just like, what was I thinking? And I was the only person out there. all day. I saw two people when I got there with old 26-inch hardtails, and I thought, and they left before me while I was getting ready. I don't know where they went, but it wasn't the trail. They did not do the loop. I got all the spider webs. I saw nobody else. The tracks I saw must have been from earlier in the weekend. And when I got back to the parking lot, nobody else was there. When I went by Brazil Creek, the only people there were on side by sides. In fact, I named my ride on Strava, quote, the only idiot out here today.
How was the
hot.
trail? Was it in good shape, or is it really grown over?
There are sections that are kind of grown over. I didn't pull any ticks off though. I'm kind of just used to it. It'll be good by the Epic. They always go work on it usually.
What
It's
about
not
by Friday? What about by Friday morning when we're gonna ride it again?
about that. I have a problem Friday if we have to go very early because I have to have a work appointment Friday morning. But we'll talk about that later.
Don't bail on me, Klint.
You might have to push your time back if at all possible. Anyway, the thing about Berryman Trail right now is there are sections that just seem to me to be a lot more eroded than they used to be. And I've been riding it since 2017, 2018. And there are sections from, I guess, the logging they've done has maybe diverted some water off of some of these roads that the water is now runs onto the trail in a way it used to not. And there are just sections that just seem like loose baseball size rocks and roots, and that really kind of slows you down. And then there's a lot of areas where it's like it's washed gravel, where it's like an inch or two of like soft gravel, even when it's dry, that just you're always looking
It's
to
like
avoid,
unpacked gravel.
and it just doesn't, you have to work for everything. It's still fun. I mean, and it'll make you stronger. And you need to, if you're going to do the BT Epic, you need to go get a taste of it. But it's not like riding at Zombie, or even Chubb. I know Chubb's very rocky, but for the most part, it's like dirt, and then there's a hard rock knob, and then there's dirt again. This is more very gravelly feeling surface with just a lot of loose rocks. But it's 26 miles of trail, so I don't, I'm not complaining because it'd be really hard to maintain, but it's just like, if you could get a volunteer day of like 50 or 60 people to go out, say like, okay, we're going to have a teams of 2 and each of you get a mile and here's a rake and just go rake and do your mile and be done. It could be right back into great shape, but as it is right now, it's a little rough. It's not a smooth. There's people that love going out there on hardtails. I would not want to ride there on a hardtail. That's for sure. Does not sound like any fun to me whatsoever. So that's what you have look forward to. Also, real quick, yeah, we depending on the time, what time you have to get back home. That's kind of our issue. Real quick though, I know we haven't even talked about the bike. I'm a little aggravated because I didn't realize this until today, but the BT Epic's October 15. The BT Epic is an established huge race that's been around for I don't know how many years. Okay.
I think the BT Epic is October 14th, Clint.
Is it the 14th? It's that Saturday, whichever day.
That Saturday, yeah.
Yeah. Either way, it doesn't matter. My issue still stands. Yes, it's the 14th. Okay. On October 15th, down in Bentonville, they scheduled this Leadville qualifier series Little Sugar race. That's the same exact kind of race, right? You can pick. They do it in kilometers, but you can do either 100K, 50K, or 25K. And it's part of the Leadville series, so that's a big deal. And I'm like, you cannot convince me they didn't plan it for that day to try to directly compete with and pull people away from the BT Epic, which has been a long-standing, you know what I'm saying? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, but if I'm not, that really kind of peeves me a little bit.
Yeah, why couldn't they at least do like why couldn't they just do it the next weekend?
Yeah, do it the week before, do it the week after. But I can't say I'm surprised. Mountain bike capital of the world, Kyle. Mountain bike capital of the world. It's
Careful
the
now.
only place that matters. Anyway, okay, now that I've lost all our Arkansas listeners and they'll never listen again, let's move on to the bike, which, by the way, this would be a perfect bike for Bentonville. That's for sure. Like, if I was going to ride at Bentonville, I'd probably rather ride this bike than a bigger bike.
How did it feel out at Steelville on the jump lanes and stuff? Did you do all the big drops and features and clear all the jumps to landing and everything?
Oh yeah, yeah. Even some flat landings, and I could not believe how well. Let's talk. We'll talk about the rear suspension first because that's sort of enigmatic and part of the design of the bike and what came on the bike. I bought a frame only, came with a Floatex shock, and I could not believe how efficiently it uses its travel. So what I mean by efficiently is it is not a harsh bike, but when you start, it is, I've never experienced this. So like you sit on the bike to the sag point and it's like it sags and it's like it just hits a wall. And it doesn't feel like it's firming up and kind of the sag is kind of bouncy when you're pedaling. No. It's like it sags and it stops. And when you pedal, it is the most efficient pedaling feeling bike I've ever had by far, even more than the YT. All right. So I'm thinking, well, this thing's going to be harsh. No. When you hit the bumps, it moves. But it's like it doesn't overuse the travel. It feels very good. But to me, I'm comparing it directly to the YT Izzo because they are very similar in their intentions. They're very similar in their travel, similar type bikes. The YT felt to me like pretty stiff on the top part of the stroke, kind of harsh and chattery. But then, like if you hit a jump or a landing, it kind of would blow through the middle of the shock and then ramp up pretty good at the end. And in bone stock form, I was bottoming it out pretty easy. So you had this weird thing of it, like on the little bumps and pedaling being very stiff and going down the hills very kind of chattery, but then not really having the support when you're landing or pushing into things. Whereas this bike is like the opposite. I never bottomed it out, even on there's a jump that really there's not a landing. You kind of jump up to a flat and land pretty harshly, and it was fine. And I'm looking at the slider on the shocks. How much travel am I using? Really paying attention to that. Paying attention to it at Berryman. And like I said, it's not harsh, but it's like the curve of the suspension is it's gonna move as much as it needs to move to absorb that bump, but no more. Like there's not a wasted dead area of travel. So it's not only is it pedaling efficient, it is travel usage efficient. And the only other bike I've never ridden it, but I've heard another bike described this way. Was the Yeti SB 150. I remember watching reading a review, big enduro bike shootout, and I said like it's not harsh, it's firm feeling. It's like it's only using just as much travel as you need it to use at that point in time. And that's how this bike feels. Very much has like a bottomless feel. I was shocked. And part of that is got to be the Maestro, like the design, and part of it's probably it's a better shock as well. That Floatex is better than a DPS, but man, I couldn't believe it once I kind of got comfortable and used to it and realized like it's gonna be good. Then on jumps, berms, all that stuff, totally fine. The frame is very beefy. Now I have what would probably be considered a pretty light build on this bike. overall. Have a very light fork, light cranks, middle of the road weight wheels probably. They're carbon
Clint,
wheels, but I don't think they're like super light.
what did we say this bike built? The bike built finished. Wait, do we weigh it? I forget.
We weighed it with pedals, but without brake rotors, which we can talk about later.
Oh, that's
But
right.
it was, what was it, 27.8 on your scale with pedals. So with the
Is that
brake
what it was?
rotors on there,
I honestly don't remember.
we'll say with brake rotors and a bottle cage, we'll call it 28 even.
Okay.
But that front, and that's with a GX axis derailleur, so potentially could have been a little lighter with a.
Oh, I actually have a question then. So outside of the bike, I mean, this is the frame and the specifics around the bike. This was your first time riding and really getting miles on axis. What was your thought about axis
I
shifting?
love it. I
Is
knew
it
I
good?
would. Oh yeah, I knew I would. And I'm not a hack shifter. It's very rare that I try to slam gears. And I know my trails, like I'm pretty good about if I'm going down a hill and I'm getting close to the bottom and I know a climb's coming, which if you're out on the Ozark Trail anywhere, not just Berryman, if you are going down a hill and you realize you're about at the bottom, just go ahead and start clicking downshifts because you're going right back up. It's not going to be flat. You go down hills, you make it to the bottom, you go up a hill. Very rarely do you get to the bottom of a hill and just keep going across the flat bottom. So I'm pretty good about not hacking, but man, sure was nice to just barely tap something with my thumb and it shifts. And never had to micro adjust anything. I did the B tension in my stand with a 3mm to check the gap. I didn't even use the tool. That's how I did the B tension. I barely adjusted my limit screw on the littlest cog side. For that limit, didn't mess with the limit on the big cog, and it's been shifting perfectly. Like no issues at all. So
Awesome.
yeah, I'm stoked on that. I'm very happy to be having that, especially on long rides. My thumb used to get tired of, probably had dirty cables or whatever, but I remember last year at the BT Epic, I was literally like taking my hand off the bar and pushing my shifter lever to downshift with my palm of my hand because my thumb was so tired from shifting.
It is crazy though, man. It is different.
Yeah. Well, speaking of different, so anyway, part of what's making this bike so awesome right now is there are some different parts on it, and buddy, they are no joke. Like, I put a Manitou Mattoc Pro fork on this bike, and I have
Ooh,
Hayes Dominion A4 brakes,
okay.
and don't act like that. You helped me set it up. Everybody, Kyle helped me build the bike. He's trying to feed me here. And we had a time, didn't we, Kyle? Oh boy.
Yeah,
Uh,
let's talk about that, Clint.
let's go
Let's
ahead
talk
and get
about the
into
time.
it.
Let's talk about the time that we had here.
Okay, so let's start with the brakes because this was an issue. So we'll talk about putting the brakes on, and then I'll talk about how they perform. So these Hayes brakes, I've heard great things about them, right? So like I'm building a bike. Let's do something different. Let's see what the hype's all about. So we get these brakes, and I had some issues with adapters and not the right size adapter and rotor and all this stuff. That's on me. You know, I'm not going to get into that, but we still had to get the brakes on and bleed them. And Hayes brakes, the lever side takes the same type of screw in as a SRAM brake. And the rear, it does not have like SRAM, that quick release kind of deal, but it's the same exact size hole as the lever side. So you basically need two of those. Well, at the back of these calipers, there's actually two different bleed port screws, and you can remove either one. Now, why they designed it this way, I don't know. But you don't have to do it on each side. You just do it on one side and it connects to the other, so whatever. However, we started with the back brake, and the screws, it's little T10 star Torx, whatever. screws, and Kyle and I broke 4 T10 tools trying
All of
to
my T10s.
all of Kyle's. I gave him one that I had back. Broke all of Kyle's T10s that he had. One was on like a 3, like a tri tool that has like a T10, a 25, and I don't know what else on it. A couple bits. I brought a bit in from my truck, broke it. I had one left in a bleed kit, like an aftermarket bleed kit I bought for SRAM stuff that it came with it. And to give it our best shot, Kyle took like a little lighter torch, heated up the caliper all around the bolt, and then we used an electronic Milwaukee impact gun with the bit in there to break it loose real fast. And that worked. We finally got it using bit number 5.
Dude,
That's a problem. Yeah. They were over torqued from the factory. Like there was no like Loctite on them. They're meant to be taken out, But
I couldn't believe that. We had to use a torch and an impact to get that off for a T10.
Yeah, it was nuts. That was dumb. I don't know what they're doing. So then when we're bleeding it, I guess Kyle's adapters are a little different than mine. And we could actually tell it was leaking around the rear port, seeping oil. So we knew we didn't have a perfect seal and that there was going to be air getting in there. There was just no getting around it. So we finally got the back brake bled as good as we could, I guess. The front, we didn't mess around. We just used the impact thing, and it came right out. So I don't know if that one would have worked with a regular wrench, Kyle. I don't know. I'm just saying, if you get this, just be warned. This was an issue. So I take them home. I had a SRAM 180 rotor lying around. I found an old Hayes 160 rotor in a drawer, which the fork I didn't realize had a 160 post, not a 180. And I just wanted to ride this thing. So I'm like, I'm putting this 160 on the front just so I can go ride. Well, Kyle, after all we went through to set these brakes up, I have to say, in my mind, all is forgiven with Hayes because these brakes are the friggin' bomb. They are
Really?
so good. Yes. Imagine the lightest lever feel that you've ever felt. The ability to modulate your brakes like you can with SRAM brakes, but when you kind of just put a little more of the pressure to it, the grabbiness of Shimano. I mean, I have the 203 rotor and adapter at my house now. I don't know what to do with it because the brake is so good, and we did a better bleed job on the front anyway. I think just because we used a different adapter and we weren't sucking air and all this stuff. But even the rear brake is fine. Like it's the best rear brake I've ever had, even though I think it could have actually been better. We could have there's probably an air bubble in there somewhere, but shoot, you just, before you ride, turn the handlebars with the back brake lever up, pick it up a little bit where it's at the highest point, squeeze it hard a couple times, boom, feels solid as a rock. They're the best brakes I've ever ridden on. Even with a 160 front rotor, like it's got all the power. I didn't, maybe if we lived somewhere with tackier dirt, tacky rock slabs, like super steeps, I'd probably throw that 203 on the front or the back, put the 180 on the front. I don't know. But I'm saying right now, Berryman Trail, Steelville, where it's kind of gravelly and you're not like hammering the brakes super hard. I have no desire to take that 160 off the front, and I weigh over 190 pounds.
That's crazy to me, man.
They are so good. I'm a believer. I was basically going to swear them off for the future, but now my next bike build, I might just have to buy them again because they're that good. They are so good. I don't know what else to say about them other than like they're powerful, they work, they're easy at the lever, they don't feel sticky, Like they just feel so refined, and you can tell like the brake pads are, they're bigger than even SRAM code brake pads are. There's more material hitting the rotor. Um, but gosh, they're good brakes. Even with what I think is probably not an ideal bleed job on the rear, it's still fine. Like,
No kidding.
yeah, I can't believe how good they are. So, man, Hayes brakes are the real deal. And I had been told this by a few people that have had them, but I'm a believer now. And these aren't even the top end brakes. I think it's like the D series or something, or even more expensive. I'm like,
Really? Are the A4s not the high end ones?
it's either D4 or T4 are the highest end ones, like the downhill ones.
Oh, interesting. I didn't
But
even know that.
these are better than my Code RSs were, which at that point were the best brakes I'd ever had.
What do you think about the fork?
Okay, so this fork, uh, no joke. So we got a Manitou Mattoc Pro, and
Which, just for the listeners, I also want to throw this out here because I do have some experience with this line of forks now. Manitou, what Manitou has classically been in the mountain bike industry outside of the dirt jump world for the past, like, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, has not been anything worth talking about in the same breath typically as Fox or RockShox. That has changed as of about a year or two ago. Manitou has put in a pretty fair amount of effort into developing a product program that keeps up with world-class elite stuff.
yes. So, and keep in mind, I'm comparing this to a Fox Factory 34, the newer one with the stiffer lowers, the curved arch, Grip 2 damper, right? Like top of the line that Fox makes for this travel, 130 travel. Ride quality, this Manitou is better, period, in every way. Literally in every way. It's lighter, it's stiffer, and the feel at my hands, it's plusher, yet it holds up and has better support all the like through the stroke. I mean,
No
if
kidding.
Manitou had the distribution and all this stuff, this should absolutely be this would be a Fox 34 killer. I know because I rode that Fox 34. I have the same grips, the same handlebars that were on my Izzo, exact same grips and handlebars and tires and wheels. Same stem even, just 5 millimeter longer stem, and it was much more comfortable on my hands through the rough stuff. Jumping wise, way better. Ramps up good because it has two different air chambers. I essentially looked up Manitou's suggested pressures, use those. I might be a little higher than what they suggested, and I'm probably going to go down a few psi, maybe in the main, just to see. But I have no desire to really change it at all. Um, it was perfect at Steelville. It was great on the Berryman. Traction, plushness, but yet, I'm looking at how much travel I'm using. It's not blowing. That was the thing about the 34 is it just felt like it was so soft. You had to put 4 or 5 volume spacers in it to get it to feel like it had any support, or you had to ramp up the compression knobs so much that it got harsh. This thing that IRT chamber, infinite rate tune, they don't use spacers. It's another air chamber. It's no joke, man. It just feels so smooth and supportive, kind of how the rear end feels. It's like it uses the travel it needs to use, but it doesn't dive through anything. And the finish on this thing, like the rebound adjuster knob and the compression adjustment knobs and the clicks as you turn it, just feel so solid. Like you're never going to be like, am I in between clicks? This is kind of loose. This kind of has a lot of wiggle room. Like, no, it is
How much how much
dead on.
ride and adjust how much ride and adjust did you do? Or did you think the initial recommended adjustment that you made at my house when you left, is that what you're riding now that you were so satisfied with? Or did you do a bunch of ride adjust, ride adjust,
Well,
ride
I
adjust?
think when I was at your house, I hadn't actually gotten the amount of air in the main chamber that I thought, because this is one thing that's weird about it. The top air is the IRT, which is like kind of works as you get deeper in the stroke, it starts taking over. And that uses like a normal Schrader valve. On bottom, if you look at the valve, it's the same threads as a normal Schrader valve, and you still use the same shock pump, but the valve inside is like bigger, and you really, really have to screw the shock pump down super tight to get it to depress enough to work. So I had actually I thought, oh, these recommended are too soft. Well, what I think was happening is I just didn't have nearly as much in there. So I had put like, instead of 80 PSI, I'd put like 100. And once I actually got the 100 in there, I realized, oh, this is way too stiff. So I backed it back down to, now I'm at like 80 in the main chamber, and that feels pretty good. That was what was recommended for someone 200 pounds. I'm not 200 pounds, but I figured by the time I get my gear on, I've got a backpack full of water, I've got stuff in the bike, whatever, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of extra weight on me. I'm going to be over 200 pounds. And then as far as clickers go, when I was at Steelville, I ran 1 click of high speed compression from full open and like 5 or 6 from full open of low speed. Out at Berryman, I ran like no high speed and 1 click of low speed. I couldn't tell a huge difference. It felt good both places. It might be that it's just one of those forks that has a pretty big window that it's happy in. But here's the thing is, like, I'm so satisfied. I'm not chasing settings. And you know how much I tinker with forks usually. Like every new fork, every new bike, I'm constantly tinkering.
Right.
And this one is just so smooth. Now, setting it up, it is internally adjustable, which is nice because you don't have to buy a new air spring if you want to change the travel. And it'll go anywhere from 110 to 150. However, you are supposed to have a specialty tool, which is literally just a normal cassette tool that has had a section chopped out so you can slide it over the air spring shaft, slide it up into the upper. There's a lock ring, and you put a wrench on it and use the cassette tool to undo that. Well, if you look at the Manitou, if you search for the Manitou toolkit online for this, it's like 60 to 70 bucks, depending on which brand you get. And I'm like, this is a cassette tool is like $7. So I took my steel cassette tool I had. I marched myself to town to Booyer Lumber Home and Hardware. I went down to the basement, found a vise, an angle grinder, some goggles, and head earmuffs, and I just grinded mine out myself.
Nice.
And then I took some files and filed away to try to get all the edges inside smooth so I wouldn't scratch the shaft. And quite honest, what I should have done was get a Dremel or a drill after I had chopped it to really kind of ream it out on the inside to make it a lot smoother. And I will definitely do that in the future if I need to use it again. By a miracle, I did not scratch anything. I don't know how I didn't, because it wasn't, if you looked at it, you could tell it was a home job. But I managed to get the travel changed, although there was one moment where I was about to freak out. As I was screwing the air shaft back in, there's threads and then there's a rubber O-ring. And I didn't realize I should have put more lubrication, either slick oleum or oil, around that O-ring, because it had gotten, as I'm tightening it down, it didn't slide itself into the stanchion and was kind of squeezing out. And I was afraid I damaged it, but I didn't. I backed it off, lubed it, put it back in. It all went together fine. It's been fine. It's not leaking air or anything. So, that was kind of a moment where I was like, oh boy. But no, I managed to get it there. After putting it back together, and pumping it up, I used this fork does have bleed screws. You can't just push them with your thumb like on the Fox. You have to take a 2.5 millimeter Allen, kind of unscrew them, screw them back in like on a dirt bike. And I mean, it does build up some pressure in there. Every fork does. when I had a Zeb Ultimate that didn't have those ports, I would just use either a zip tie or like the plastic dental floss / picks that are real thin. They work really good. But other than that, man, this fork's been great. Like, it was kind of a chore getting the travel change, but if you've got a bike that takes a 120 or a 140, you can order this fork that's already set that way, and buddy, you are gonna love it. Like, it, they say it's stiffer. I totally believe it. It feels more solid, like a slightly bigger fork, but it's lighter weight than even a Fox 34 with Grip 2. So there is one other problem though with it. With the reverse arch, if you are a bike rack user and you have like a quad rack or other racks where it's meant to clamp on your front wheel at the fork, you can't use that rack because you'd be clamping against the stanchions, and that's a big no-no. So that is a problem I have. I'm back to using the tailgate pad. Some I didn't think about. I'm looking for a used rack that I can buy and maybe sell my quad. I have a nice quad rack, but just can't use it with this fork. That's really my only complaint about it, but it looks sweet. It rides great. I don't know how a Pike Ultimate would be compared to it, so I can't speak to that, but I am totally satisfied with this fork in a way that I never was with that 34. The 34, to get it to ramp up enough for jumping and stuff, you had to make it feel harsh, and if you wanted to be buttery smooth and soak up all those bumps, you were gonna blow through the travel, and I was never really that big of a fan of it. But this thing is rad. Like, makes the bike awesome.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that you liked it. I know it was kind of a dice roll on both of the brakes and the fork, just to kind of give it a shot and see. And there, I know, our favorite shop, Granada Cyclery, was looking to find some guys to give that stuff a try. And so I'm really glad that you ended up liking it, though.
Oh yeah, I love it. I need to call those guys and give them a report. Because it is wonderful. That fork's great. Um, Suspension wise, on the rear, one thing I will say, if you own this bike, Giant they only recommend 20 to 25% sag. Uh, I I'm gonna go more sag than that. I'm gonna soften it up a little bit. Um, while it's less chattery than my Izzo was, it still feels pretty stiff. And I ran the code on the shock on Fox's website, and I don't know how much of it this is the Maestro and how much is just the shock, but they spec the second to largest possible spacer in that shock that Fox makes, the 0.8. Okay. Um, so the air in the shock is going to be it's going to ramp up a lot, very progressive. It's no wonder I haven't bottomed out at all. So I think I can go down in pressure and try to get this thing to be a little more plush. Having ridden it though, at the recommended sag range, I cannot for the life of me figure out why Giant has bothered to spec the full build models with Fox Live valve, because it is not necessary on this bike. The anti-squat, I guess, just the kinematics. This is, like I said, the most efficient pedaling bike I have ever ridden. I mean, truly, I and I haven't had bikes that were that bad at seated pedaling at all. But I mean, this thing feels like a hardtail. You just sit on it, and it just feels like once you hit the sag point, it feels like you're on a hardtail. Um, but like I said, it still works when you're pedaling through the bumps, which is amazing. But that being said, I can't imagine why I would ever need live valve to complicate things. If I if I bought a full build, which the full builds look like pretty good deals to me, they come with carbon wheels and all kinds of stuff. I would probably just turn the live valve off and just run it open or whatever, because it's just not necessary at all. Like, there's when we do the BT Epic, I might flip the switch for the first 4 miles because it's gravel road, maybe. But as soon as we get to the trail, I'm flipping the climb switch to open. I was running literally one click of low speed compression. That's it. And that's just because I don't like to run any dials wide open at all. And there was no need like to firm this thing up at all. None. So it's going to be a great bike for doing, if you want to do big days on a fun bike that's comfortable to ride. I've got that Giant Romero SL saddle on. It's great. Uh, fits similar shape to like a Specialized bridge, but I think the foam and just the design is definitely more refined. Yeah, this is going to be a great BT Epic bike. Like, I'm very excited. I think my hands are going to feel better than they ever did. So yeah, and it's not any heavier. I was worried about it being heavier than my Izzo. Maybe it's a half. I don't even think it'd be a half pound heavier. I'm not sure it's heavier at all, especially with that fork on there. The front end is very light, very, very light.
Yeah, and I tell you too, because I remember picking it up and thinking that it was significantly lighter than it actually was. Like in the hand, like when you moved it and picked it around and moved it around the basement and stuff, like it moved lighter than 28 pounds.
Yeah, and I think that's because I think all the weight bias is in the back with part of the Maestro link is aluminum. You can see a weld in there, and then I'm sure the GX Axis derailleur is a little heavier than, let's say, if I just had a mechanical X01, I would assume.
Maybe, but then you got the cable and the housing that go with it. I don't know if a battery
Yeah,
weighs more than cable and housing.
it's probably not much. It's not enough to notice, right? Somebody had said something. I was at Steelville talking to some guys, and they're like, "Yeah, I was looking at that, but I don't want the extra weight." And I'm like, "It doesn't matter. I promise you. Like, it's worth. If there's any extra weight to it, it's worth it." There's a
100%.
reason that all the SRAM riders at World Cup level are using Bluetooth, either Axis or transmission, and it's not because they make them. If they wanted mechanical XX1, they would let them have it. I guarantee you.
Right.
So it's a great bike, man, and I like that it's a little slacker than the Izzo. I run it in high mode. I think it's either half a degree or a degree slacker than the Izzo was at the head tube angle. And it just feels like a more balanced bike, even though it feels a little smaller because I'm on a medium, which is what I should be on. The Izzo, I had to run a 40 mil stem to make it fit. Just felt like it was real long in the front, real short in the back. This feels a little more neutral, but it climbs great. I did a super, super steep technical climb at Steelville. Um, if anybody who's been there, if you know the trail surfs up, you also know that at the top you can go to the left and there's a trail. Apologies. There's a trail that goes down that's just rollers, but it has a really, really steep part. And I was climbing up that, and I usually do that just for the challenge of it every time I go. And I kind of was worried about this shorter bike and maybe having loop out Larry moments. Not at all. Climbed right up it, never broke traction, which was crazy because it's so loose, and just went right up the steep part way easier than I ever have. It kind of shocked me. And yeah, our friend Chad Suterer was like, "Kyle, I got to ride one of your old bikes from like 2018 or something.
Oh, did you? His
Your
remedy?
Remedy 9.8 from
Yeah.
whenever that was."
Yeah.
Uh, because he wanted to check out my bike. He was thinking he had been looking at these same bikes. I was like, "Well, shoot, here, take it up the climb trail. I'll ride your bike up." And I don't miss 27.5 remedies. Fine bike,
I
been great.
I
He's
don't
gotten
either.
his use out of it for sure. Still in
Oh, he
great
has.
shape, and he's in great shape too. But yeah, I think I've got him talked into getting one of these bad boys.
There you go.
He really liked it, so I guess that's that. Any other questions on it? You gonna get one? You gonna get rid of that top fuel and come on over to the Big
Oh,
G?
man. I don't know because I don't know. My thing is that I am pretty desperate, if I'm real honest, and I don't even know if I can say this on this podcast, but I'm pretty desperate for Specialized or Santa Cruz to release a downcountry bike. I think they're very close many places. I think the standard stump jumper is close. I also think that the Blur TR is close. The problem is that the tall boy is too much and the Blur TR is not enough. And I think I need a bike that with the weight of a Blur TR with the geometry of the tall boy. That's the bike that I'm waiting to get released. And I have no indications at all that bike is going to ever exist. But I am hopeful. So I'm going to probably hold out and see what Specialized in Santa Cruz do. My problem currently is that I want a 120 fork. And I don't know how that bike would handle a 120 fork. I'm not opposed to it. I just don't want to have to buy a new build kit. My goal is to buy a frame and move my entire build I currently have over to a new frame.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess it'd probably, just be a little bit steeper with a 120 fork. And you could run it in slack mode, but man, your bottom bracket's going to be awfully low. So unless you're going to start running like 165 cranks, I don't know about that. But if you're wanting to do more cross country riding on it, 120 fork's going to put you at like, I don't know, a 66-degree head tube angle or something. It's not that bad.
No, and I think right now I'm 65.5, and I really do like 65.5 with a 120 bike. So I don't know. So and that's here is, if I'm real honest, I hate to even say it, but that Top Fuel, I can't picture a bike getting better for what I need a bike to do than that Top Fuel. That bike is incredible. It is so fast. It's like 25 pounds on the nose, and
isn't that
the
light?
geometry.
Did you get it that light?
It is. I think with a frame full of stuff, like, you know what I mean, like flat fix, CO2 inflator, etc. Like all my flat fix stuff's in the frame, and pedals and bottle cage, I was still sub 26.
Jeez, what wheels? You must have some light wheels on that thing.
1290 is what they weigh. They're 1290 grams.
My wheels are not that light, and I'm fine with that because I don't want.
No, it's a full. I want to
ride. I'm gonna race some like enduros depending on the place on this bike.
No, yeah, mine is very much a. So that's the thing though, is that I still have a pretty efficient big bike. So like I didn't do the enduro. I've still got the Stumpy Evo, and so that bike that bike is not bad pedaling around places. So like I can still ride that bike anywhere that I'm gonna go where I want to have fun. The Top Fuel is absolutely a dedicated mileage or cross country, race bike, endurance race bike. It's definitely built. It is very specifically purpose built for what I use it for. It's not an all purpose bike at all.
Yeah, I guess you can make them light because Yolanda Neff chose to ride one at one of the World Cups. It was like a modified Top Fuel.
Mm-hmm.
Because she wanted to ride it because the track was really technical. So
I
didn't realize you could get that thing that light, huh?
It took a lot. It's a full XC build. It's XX drivetrain. It's carbon bars, carbon cranks, carbon seat, carbon bars, carbon everything. Now, okay, so now it might be over 26 now. So I did move away from the foamy grips and the carbon saddle, and I moved to a comfortable saddle and a ergonomic grip. So I might be over 26 now with those parts because I could only get a tie saddle. I didn't buck up for the $500 carbon saddle for the new saddle. I wanted to see how it felt on the bum.
How can you survive without a carbon saddle? Oh, man.
Oh, a lot more comfortably, I'll tell you that, because I was not purposefully, but like I was consciously running the wrong width saddle for my sit bones, but it was the lightest saddle at my house. And so that's how I built the bike. And I paid for it dearly at the last cross country marathon race that I did because I was in pain bad. And I did the new saddle, and it probably weighs double. I probably went from like a 140 gram saddle to like a 250 gram saddle.
That's what mine is. 245 is what my Romero Superlight is, and that's the lightest saddle I've ever had. Probably.
The last one I had was the narrowest width. I pulled it off of my BMX race bike because that's what I got it for. But it was the narrowest width, the smallest pattern, this like lightest saddle. It was like 142 gram saddle or something like that. And so now I'm on like a 260 or 280 or something like that. It's probably double the weight. So I
It's
probably
fine.
am over 26 now. And I've realized that 140 grams is important. It's important to save weight where you can. It's not important if it doesn't matter how light your bike is if you can't sit down to pedal it for the last 10 miles.
Yeah. All
And
right,
so
Kyle. Well,
that's where I'm at.
I gotta go. This has been we're at 50 minutes of recording here, so this definitely went longer than I realized. But
Oh yeah.
yeah, man, it's a great bike. I wonder how light it would be with your wheels on there and some of your parts, but that's about it. I think everywhere else there's not really anywhere to save weight unless you start getting into like super light dropper posts and stuff. So realistically, I'm stoked with it. It's just as light as my old bike was. Um, so yeah, it's more fun. It feels safer. Uh, I'm digging it. I really am.
Well, awesome. Well, good deal. Let's get out and ride it Friday.
Yeah. We got to talk about that. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. If you have any questions, you can always hit us up on Facebook, on our Facebook page, World's Okayest Mountain Bike Podcast, or okaystmtb@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.